You don't even want to think about starting an Airbnb business in 2025 until you've looked at these three things. This video is about the three things you need to consider before you just rush in and buy a property thinking that you can short-term rent it, put it on Airbnb, put it on Vrbo. It may not be as easy as you think, and you actually may not be able to make a profit. When you really sharpen your pencil and put your pencil to paper and calculate whether or not you're going to be able to make a profit, you may be surprised to find out that it's just not possible in 2025. And this is why. So as a successful Airbnb host running a small business, not trying to scale anything since 2016, I can tell you, we've been at war with neighborhoods, we've been at war with HOAs, we've been at war with the city and the city ordinance, and now we are at war with the county. What do I mean when I say we're at war with the county? Well, every county in America has property taxes. And those property taxes are how the counties get money to pay their fire departments and their teachers and the police officers and whatever else the county legislature decides to tax the people for. At the county level, there are three major challenges that are just killing Airbnb businesses. The first major challenge is taxation. So specifically in Kansas City, just a couple of years ago, the cities decided to start taxing short-term rentals as hotels. And so now we have to collect 7.5%. The platform collects it, they charge the guest, and then they remit it to the host, and then the host has to remit it to the city. And now the counties are onto that. You know, whenever there's a nice, fat, juicy pie, you're always going to find somebody who wants to come along and stick their fat little fingers in the pie and have a piece, even though they didn't buy any of the ingredients, even though they didn't take the time to learn how to bake the pie. They didn't mix everything up and bake it and make sure it didn't burn and all that. They want to come along when the pie smells and looks delicious and stick their hand in hot pie and grab a slice. So that's what's happening. So I know in 2020, the end of 2024, Vrbo came along and they decided that they were going to start collecting revenue for the state, the county, the city, and also even for the streetcar. So for example, in Kansas City, Missouri, now our guests are paying 16.9% in basically sales tax, occupancy tax. And so you just got to tack that. I mean, it doesn't come out of our pocket as the host, but it definitely makes our listings less attractive to those who are looking to come to town. They're on a budget and they're looking for a deal on a place to stay. It's just, it kind of, you know, I guess it levels the playing field between the hotel industry and the small business mom and pop Airbnb host. The second thing, at the county level, that is just killing Airbnbs across the nation is zoning. What do I mean by that? Well, originally you could buy a single family home, say in the urban core, like whatever is your midtown or your uptown or a neighborhood right around the old downtown, or even out in the suburbs, 15-20 minutes from downtown. And you were allowed to have an Airbnb in those zonings. Say it was zoning at R1.5, R6, R7.5, basically residential zoning. And in Kansas City, they outlawed it at the city level and said, no, under the last ordinance, I said, no, you can no longer have an Airbnb in residential zoning. In fact, they are only allowed in commercial or urban renewal districts. Now, there are UR districts around the downtown area, and so it is possible to still get a license for a new Airbnb. But effectively, what they've done is made it impossible to scale that business in that city, because at least they allowed us to grandfather in our existing licenses. But if you did not have an existing short-term rental permit, then you were not allowed to get a permit in the residential zoning. So we started to look in other jurisdictions, and we found a state that is friendly to Airbnbs and even had narrowed it down to a major city. And the agents were saying, so we asked the agents, you know, can you do Airbnb here? They're like, oh yeah, we have Airbnbs, you can do it, it's no problem. But make sure you check with the county just to be sure, to CYA themselves. And so I did that. I went onto the county website, and actually I went to ChatGPT and said, hey, can I do a short-term rental in this county? And sure enough, you cannot. It is not allowed in residential zoning. So on a county level, they've outlawed short-term rentals unless you do an application for a variance of zoning. So you're saying, look, county, I know it's not allowed in residential zoning. I'd like to vary this zoning to commercial. And that's going to be very difficult to do in a neighborhood. The other way you can do it is through a special use permit. Now, I've done this before because in Kansas City, they outlawed the suburbs, and we had an existing Airbnb, but in order to apply for a new short-term rental permit under the new ordinance, they were going to allow it. They were going to grandfather us in, but we still had to apply for a special use permit. And so it's not an impossible process, but it did take us 6 months. You do have to have like a community meeting where you send out letters to neighbors within a certain, say, 300 feet of the property, give them an opportunity to come and speak to them at a neutral venue. And then also it'll get set for a hearing. The BZA, Board of Zoning Adjustment, well, you'll present evidence. The neighbors will have an opportunity to come and give their testimony, whether they are for it or against it, and then they vote. And so it was like an extra $625 for the application. You still had to pay the $250 a year for the short-term rental permit. And so, and it took probably, I don't know, probably close to 20 hours out of my life. And so we did get ours approved. If you're in the middle of say an HOA, or then it's going to be difficult to get past the neighbors and get their blessing. And so if they come and they, protest that they don't want it in their neighborhood, in their subdivision, and since there's such a stigma against Airbnb already, or short-term rentals, then it makes it difficult. And I've seen it before. If you're buying in an HOA, you really need to look at the CCRs, the covenants and restrictions, because even if the HOA is expired or it's voluntary, the deed restrictions run with the land. What does that mean? That means they're on the deed, they're on the title, and when that person sells the house to you, those restrictions follow. They stay on the deed. It's a contract, right? The first person that bought that house or built in that neighborhood, they agreed, they signed that contract, and that contract transfers to you. And so you always want to get a copy of the CC&Rs really before you go to contract on a property. But if you've got 10 or 14 days to do your due diligence, then you can always get a copy and read through it then. So you got to worry about the HOA, the CCRs, which are the deed restrictions, and also a CDD, which is Community Development District. So at the county level, they are killing Airbnb businesses with taxation, with zoning restrictions, and this is the one that nobody's talking about, this third one here. They're killing, or in the process of killing, Airbnbs by reclassifying single-family residential property into commercial property. So what would that mean to your Airbnb? So in Kansas City, a residential property is taxed at 19%. A commercial property is taxed at 32%. So what does that effectively look like? I'll give you a real life example of what happened to us and what happened to our property. So in Jackson County, Missouri, they are allowed to reassess property tax values every 2 years. So in 2023, all of our properties got reassessed. Some of them went up 50%. Some of them tried to go up 400%. Some of them went up 1,000%. And it was a big problem for the taxpayers of Jackson County. So we tried to negotiate every single one of those, and we were successful in coming to an agreement with the county on all of them but one. And we do teach this in our curriculum. We teach our students exactly how to go through this process, what it looks like, and how they can succeed. If you can't informally settle the matter, then it goes in front of the BOE, the Board of Equalization. That is a group of county residents, and they're appointed to this board. And I believe that there are 5 on the board, and they give you an opportunity to submit evidence in advance. You can submit evidence of the condition of the property. You can submit evidence of comparable sales or an appraisal that you have done. You can submit testimony as to why you think it should be lowered. You can submit bids of deferred maintenance, or if you need a new roof, or if there's a foundation problem, and then submit that evidence to try to get it knocked down. So we did all that. We went through the process, and we were able to present our evidence in front of the BOE, and our assessment, which was at about $275, and the county had tried to bump it up from $275 to $475, we said, look, we agree on a number of $350,000. So that was considered a win in front of the BOE. So our annual taxes went up from like $3,000 to $4,000. And so we were waiting for our decision letter to come via email or mail, and we weren't getting it. In fact, it didn't come until the very last day that you could appeal their decision from the BOE, if you weren't happy, to the Missouri State Tax Commission. And so we got the letter and said 350,000. So I went on to the county website to see, okay, so what are my taxes going to be exactly, so I can go ahead and make payment. And I noticed our taxes had gone from 3,000 to almost 11,000. And I was like, holiday hoobie woody? I mean, how did that happen? So upon further inspection, I noticed that they reclassified our residential single-family home from residential property tax classification to commercial property tax classification. So jurisdictions are doing this. So I think about 14 counties in Missouri, so less than a quarter are doing that. And I know it's being done in other jurisdictions across the country. And so you might be planning on buying a property and figuring, oh, well, it's valued at 400,000, I'm buying it for 600. So, you know, the county's going to reassess, say the current tax bill is 4,000. Now, you know, it's going to bump up to 6,000 in the second year you're in there. But what you may not be counting on is that, you know, you may be taxed at a residential rate, but now they're going to bump it up to a commercial rate. So you're thinking, oh yeah, it's going to be 6,000. Well, guess what? It could very well be triple that. It could be 18,000. So now you're looking at $1,500 a month just to pay your property tax bill. I mean, we are currently at $1,000 a month on our property tax bill on a single family home that's valued, fair market value, at $350,000. Why? Because they're taxing us at the commercial rate. So this is something that nobody's talking about, and it can absolutely kill your bottom line. I mean, if you're planning on just a few $100s a month for taxes, and now you're paying $1,000 or $1,500 a month just for property tax, we're not talking about the higher insurance and the higher interest rates and special assessments and water bills going through the roof, utilities. You know, we're just talking about what's going on at the county level. So the county's killing us with taxation, with zoning restrictions, making the Airbnbs illegal, and with a reclassification of the property from residential to commercial. So as a property owner and as a property tax payer, it's important that you fight back. You have to push back, and you have to follow the procedures that are in place in your jurisdiction. In every jurisdiction in America, they have property tax. They reassess it every year, every 2 years, and then there's always a mechanism in place for you to challenge that. And so we do teach our students how to do that, how they must do it, just kind of as a matter of course in order to keep the cost of business down. Now in Missouri, there is some good news. There's some good news in the short term, and there's potentially some good news in the long term. So let's talk about the good news in the short term first. So specifically in Jackson County, Missouri, we actually learned that we may have been the only host in 2023 where they reclassified the property from residential to commercial, because in 2025, when all the reassessments came out, all of the other hosts were finally reclassified from residential to commercial. They stuck their head up and they said, whoa, this is not fair, this is not going to work. And basically they organized along with under the Kansas City Short-Term Rental Alliance group, which is a free Facebook group. So if you are a short-term rental host and you're in Kansas City or Missouri, there are organizations that you can follow and join. On June 18th, 2025, just less than 2 weeks ago, the county passed Ordinance 5987. And basically, this is a major step in Jackson County. It orders the assessor to postpone reclassification for at least a year. So that's going to push it to 2026. They can only reassess every other year on odd number years. So that actually pauses it up until 2027. So that will give relief to the host for at least 2 more years. Now, why are they doing that? Are they doing that because the squeaky wheel gets the oil? Not exactly. Actually, what's going on is that in Kansas City, the summer of 2026, in June and July, you know, we are one of the World Cup hosts at the Arrowhead Stadium. And so the city already knows that there's a shortage of hotel rooms. And so the last thing they want to do is start pushing Airbnb hosts out of business. So they need us, and they want to put their best face forward for Kansas City. And you don't want tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people coming to town to watch the World Cup, and then there's nowhere for them to stay. That's not a good look. And so the county has given us a reprieve for now. That is a short-term win of a battle, but that doesn't win the war. So what kind of long-term relief are we looking at? Well, also in 2025, at the state level, House Bill 1086 has been drafted and it's gone through committee, and it almost made it to the floor for a vote. And why is that important? Well, it's important because 1086 would actually restrict or prohibit the counties from reassessing residential property that is used as a short-term rental, which is stays of 28 nights or less. It prohibits them from reclassifying that property from residential to commercial. And so that would actually be a huge victory for short-term rental hosts. And so if you are in Missouri, anywhere in Missouri, and you are a short-term rental host, or you're thinking about becoming a short-term rental host, you definitely want to figure out who your local representative is and your state senator, and reach out to them. And you can email them, call their office and say, hey, we are in support of 1086. So in summary, if you are considering becoming an Airbnb host in 2025, you must look at the restrictions. You must look at the local restrictions. You must look at the county restrictions. You must look at the statewide restrictions. You know, every state's going to be a little bit different, but they're all going to be very similar. That's why I give you some of the specifics in our state, because again, you can get on ChatGPT and just ask specifics. If you're in Minnesota, what are the restrictions? If you're in Georgia, what are the restrictions in this county, in this city, statewide? And then also, you always want to double check that by going to the county legislature site or the municipal ordinance site or this state legislature, and look up the House bill or the Senate bill and read it for yourself. So don't just rely on what I say. Definitely don't rely on just what AI says, but you have to do your due diligence. It's important if you do it before you buy the house, because again, we were just looking at a house last week and they were telling us you could do Airbnb, and then looked at the HOA restrictions. It was kind of black and white. They don't specifically say you cannot do short-term or long-term rentals, but the language said, you know, you cannot have a property that could be considered a nuisance or a disturbance to the neighborhood, which if I didn't want an Airbnb or a short-term rental in my neighborhood, that's an argument I would make. But then at the county level, it specifically restricted it in that type of residential zoning. In fact, it restricted it countywide in all residential zoning. So you had to be in a commercial district, which would be somewhere downtown, somewhere in an industrial area, maybe in a mixed-use building where they have condos and lofts. But it definitely wasn't going to work in the neighborhood that we were looking at. And the realtors were not really any help. They didn't give us the correct information. And had we signed the contract, it basically absolved them of any liability. So you couldn't come back later and say, hey, you said I could do this and now I can't. This is your fault. Now I'm stuck in this house. It's on you. You have to do your due diligence. And again, we teach our students how to do that, and we don't do it for them. We teach them how to fish so they can go out and catch their own fish and feed themselves and feed their families and run successful businesses without making a bad choice. Remember, sometimes the best deals you ever do are the deals you don't. So if you'd like to learn where we buy our real estate, how you can buy the cheapest real estate on the planet, we're going to be hosting a live event in Kansas City, Missouri this August. Click on the link below and we'll talk soon. So if you enjoyed this video, if you found value in it, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and comment. I actually read the comments. I actually respond to the comments. And I'd like to know what kind of challenges you may be facing in your city, your county, or your state. Are they trying to put everybody out of business? I know they've outlawed them in Dallas and New York City and other jurisdictions, and it's really just an attack on private property rights. It's an erosion of our property rights, and property is the foundation of wealth. If there is no private property, then there's no wealth. Private property is the foundation of our wealth, our system. It's the foundation of our generational wealth. It's how we're able to build wealth, build kingdom wealth, leave it for our children, leave it for our children's children. It can only be done through real estate. So thank you for paying attention. And if you like this video, watch this one right here. I think you'll really enjoy it.